My mom works in an office, so stories like this hit home. This isn't just story for clicks. It's about real people, real choices, and moments that change everything. If you ever done everything right and still get nothing, this story is for you. So we can recognize ourselves and stop repeating the same painful mistakes.
You should have seen his face when I handed him the letter. Pale as printer paper, voice cracking like a puberty encore. He actually said, "Is this a joke?" Like my silence for the last 2 weeks wasn't its own answer. But let me back up. The room still smelled like burnt Keurig and old carpet glue when I clicked to the final slide. Deployment complete, uptimes green, budgets blue, every item on the roadmap hit, some twice. I looked out over the conference table like I always did. Half asleep directors blinking into their coffee mugs, two C suite folks scrolling their phones, and Mark, our VP, holding court like a bored emperor. He didn't even bring the printed deck I'd prepped. Just nodded once, muttered something about good momentum, and moved on to quarterly forecasts. No questions, no comments, no well done, Emily. Just a passing. Great team effort. Let's keep the energy high. Team effort. Sure. For those new here, this is how corporate gaslighting looks with a cardigan on. 14 months I'd owned that deployment. Tech stack rebuild, vendor integration, 2 failed legacy systems duct taped together with my weekends and burnt PTO. I ran point on the client transition while onboarding 2 new engineers and documenting every brittle process I inherited from whatever fossil last touched the back end. When systems broke, I fixed them. When clients panicked, I calmed them. When nothing worked, I wrote the damn script myself. And now, my name wasn't even in the executive summary. Literally. I checked the printout afterward in the ladies' room. They listed the deployment team as a bullet point under miscellaneous. I wasn't even that. Before I go on, if you're the 97% of folks who listen to stories like these but haven't hit subscribe, do me a favor. Click it. Like the video. It helps the team keep digging up these stories and sharing them with folks who know exactly what this feels like. Okay, back to it. After the meeting, I walked past Mark in the hallway. He didn't make eye contact, just said, "Let's circle up next quarter, yeah?" And kept moving, like I was a calendar invite he'd already postponed twice. I didn't answer, didn't need to, because the file was already saved on my desktop. Final, notice, reviewed, bilegal.pdf. Dated, signed, reviewed twice. I'd prepped it the week after he skipped our one-on-one and then posted a Slack thread thanking everyone for the launch, tagging every name but mine. I didn't need revenge. I needed closure. Quiet, professional, HR-compliant closure, and a new workspace with less mildew. But the cracks started forming right there, in the space between his nod and my silence. You could feel it. That shifting energy in the office when someone knows a storm's coming, but still thinks they control the weather. They didn't know I was already scanning job boards, already talking to a recruiter from a startup out west, already reviewing equity terms with an attorney friend. They thought I'd do what I always did, smile politely, absorb the slight, double down on work until I burned out again. But this time, I wasn't staying long enough to become a lesson for the next girl. And the best part? They never saw it coming. I gave them 2 full weeks, 14 business days if you count the Friday where Mark left early for his men's retreat that somehow involved tequila and a golf cart injury. Every day I waited for the calendar ping, the Slack message, the coffee invite, anything to signal that leadership saw the work I did, understood the weight I'd carried, and had plans to acknowledge it. Instead, I got nods. That's it. Nods, like the kind you give a stranger in traffic. On the 10th day, I checked my pay stub. No adjustment, no bonus, not even a spot award. Just the same number next to my name like nothing happened. Like I hadn't just pulled off a 0-defect deployment 3 quarters ahead of projection. Like I hadn't saved 2 enterprise accounts from churning with a single midnight bug fix and a phone call that lasted longer than Mark's marriage. The hallway started to feel longer. Conversations shifted when I walked past. Not because I was being talked about, but because I wasn't. That's the part they never tell you. Invisibility doesn't always feel like exile. Sometimes it feels like being absorbed by the paint. By the second Monday, I walked over to Claire, Mark's chief of staff, and asked the question that had been rotting behind my molars for days. Any word on the post-project review? Promotion timeline? She barely looked up from her screen. He said he'll circle back next quarter. Next quarter, as in 3 months from now, as in after the next product line launch, I wouldn't be leading, as in we're hoping you quietly give up. I nodded, said thanks like a coward, walked back to my desk. Then I opened the folder titled If They Don't. Inside was the PDF. I'd written it the night I pulled the last staging logs off my machine. No emotion, no rage, just resignation dressed like closure. Dear Mark, I want to thank you for the opportunities I've had over the last 3 years. Blah, blah. All very professional. All very clean. HR would have a field day trying to find anything spicy, but then, just above my signature, I typed a single line I hadn't included before. Good luck with the next rollout. I reread it 3 times, smiled once, then hit print. That stillness people talk about after grief or epiphany, that's what it felt like. Not a storm, not a scream. Just silence finally making sense. I wasn't quitting out of anger. I was done because they'd made my presence optional, because I realized I could be brilliant and invisible at the same time. And brilliance without recognition is just unpaid therapy. The file name hadn't changed since I first saved it. Final notice, reviewed by legal.pdf, and now it was time to deliver. Mark always took his coffee at 8:45 like clockwork. 1 oat milk splash, 1 sugar in the company mug he stole from the old VP before they shipped him off to strategy advisory. He liked routine. He liked control. He liked the illusion of being the kind of leader people respected without needing to earn it. So that morning, while he was stirring his cup with the same smug little wrist flick, I walked in and set the envelope down on his desk. No fanfare, no speech, just 1 sentence. You'll want to read that before the stand-up. His eyes flicked from the envelope to me, then back again. He squinted like I just handed him a summons. I didn't wait. I turned, walked out of his office, and let the silence follow me down the hallway like a shadow I no longer needed to carry. The door creaked behind me. A beat. Then, wait, is this a joke? There it was, the crack in the performance. His voice was loud enough to bounce off the glass walls of the bullpen. I didn't stop, didn't flinch, just kept walking, past the intern pretending not to eavesdrop, past the HR manager whose eyes briefly darted from her screen to mine. My badge beeped against the exit scanner just as Mark's footsteps hit the carpet. I didn't look back, because the decision wasn't up for discussion. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a closure he hadn't earned the right to delay. In the elevator, I checked my phone once, just to make sure the copy I emailed HR had gone through. It had. Subject, formal notice, Emily R. Marsden. Attachment, final notice reviewed by legal.pdf. And inside that file, in the final paragraph, right after the part thanking the team for the learning opportunities, sat a line that would make Mark's day spiral into chaos. Per clause 7.4b, I will not be transitioning knowledge beyond week 1. All work is documented. I didn't owe them more than that. I had already stayed late when no one asked. Already trained juniors while my own title stayed frozen. Already fixed what others broke without credit or compensation. And now, they'd get exactly what they gave, the minimum required. As the elevator doors closed, I heard the echo of my name, muffled and frantic. Too late, they thought I'd be flattered by crumbs. Grateful for silence. Obedient until the next campaign. They forgot who built the thing they're standing on. And they were about to find out what happens when the foundation walks out the door. By Tuesday, they were already fumbling. I got the first ping at 9:12 a.m. from someone on the infrastructure team. Hey, Emily, do you happen to have the latest API deployment doc? I think something's missing in Confluence. 3 minutes later. Also, what's the correct order for the container orchestration? Jenkins keeps timing out. I didn't answer. Slack notifications were still active on my phone, but only because I hadn't cared enough to disable them yet. I watched them stack like panicked digital breadcrumbs. 20 unread messages in less than an hour. The irony? Most of these people hadn't spoken to me directly in weeks. But now, with Mark spinning in his chair like a suburban dad trying to fix a printer before the Super Bowl, I'd suddenly become essential again. Too late. They tried replicating my deployment pipeline off a year-old training doc someone dredged up from the archives. It was obsolete before it was even published. The CI/CD config they use still referenced the legacy asset folder I sunsetted 6 months ago. The client matrix file, which I'd custom linked to 3 access tiers and embedded with permissions logic, didn't link properly anymore because, surprise, someone had removed my Git access on Friday. So now they had a beautiful front-end shell with no functioning skeleton underneath. By mid-afternoon, I got the kicker. A screenshot forwarded from a friend still stuck inside the chaos. It was from the dev team chat. One of the junior engineers, new kid, smart, but green, had posted a message that said, "Does anyone know where the sandbox script actually lives?" He said, "Git folder B3, but I don't even see access." Oh, B3, bless his heart. B3 was a nickname, short for Brenda's third mistake. A private joke I used in my own branching system after spending 3 days untangling a mess that Brenda, the engineer turned product evangelist, left behind before she jumped to that doomed crypto startup. The folder wasn't labeled B3 in Git. It was nested under Recovery Assets Beta 2 because I was the only one paranoid enough to build a backup workflow inside a beta flag and document it in an encrypted repo I stored locally. Of course they couldn't find it. Of course, no one remembered. Because when you're the one who always catches the falling plates, people forget gravity even exists. And still, I stayed quiet. No response, no rescue. Not because I wanted them to fail, not even out of spite, but because silence is its own kind of closure, the kind you choose when your work gets praised in private and forgotten in public, the kind that says if you only value the structure when it starts cracking, you never deserve the architect. The COO sent a calendar invite that evening, requesting 15 mins to clarify deployment retention plan. I declined. I didn't need to clarify anything. I'd already built the thing. They were just now realizing what happens when the one person who knew where every thread tied off finally lets go of the yarn. And the unraveling had only just begun. Thursday's leadership sync was already 20 minutes late when Mark finally joined the call. His tie was crooked, probably from rushing, and the digital background behind him flickered like even Zoom didn't want to make eye contact. Someone tried breaking the awkward silence with a joke about server maintenance. No one laughed. The roadmap he screen shared looked off. The colors were wrong. The milestone flags were outdated, and 2 deliverables, Q3 audit prep and the API security patch, were just gone. Like no one had ever told him they existed. Except they had. I had. Repeatedly. In meetings, in Jira, in the slide deck I presented not even 2 weeks ago, the same deck he glanced at once before saying, "Great team effort," and moving on to his next coffee. Now here he was, pretending to steer the ship while waving an old map and hoping no one noticed we were already off course. And then came the moment. The COO leaned forward on the call, her voice like steel under velvet. "Mark, I'm looking at the dashboard and don't see a traceable compliance audit trail for the recent rollout. Where is it logged?" Mark blinked, clicked, shifted in his seat. Should be in the release binder," he said, trying to sound casual. It wasn't. Because there was no release binder. Because that binder had lived on my encrypted local drive, updated weekly, compiled quarterly, and synced to the secure share only accessible by me and legal. A drive I wiped clean the moment my badge deactivated, per protocol. I wasn't being vindictive, I was being compliant. The policy was clear. Personally owned architecture, scripts, tools, databases, local caches must be deleted or transferred prior to separation. I had done both. Thoroughly. By the book. But Mark didn't read the book. He skimmed summaries, delegated details, and assumed the binder would just magically reappear like it always had. That I would. He stammered something about circling back, then tried pivoting to next quarter's metrics, but the damage was done. The silence on the call wasn't the kind that waits politely. It was the kind that weighs decisions. I wasn't there, but I heard about it within the hour. A friend in finance texted me, "What the hell did you leave them with?" Mark's sweating bullets. I didn't respond. Not because I was smug, because there was nothing left to say. Nothing that hadn't already been documented, backed up, handed off, and signed for. Later that night, I got a formal email from legal. Subject: Follow-up on off-boarding compliance. Hi, Emily. Just confirming. Did you remove all personally owned architecture upon departure? I replied 5 minutes later. Yes, as per offboarding compliance policy, let me know if you need the time-stamped checklist. No exclamation points, no smiley faces, just a clear, quiet record of a woman who did her job, documented her work, and walked out before the rot could claim her too. Because silence isn't always the absence of sound. Sometimes it's proof you already said everything that mattered, loud enough the first time. Friday morning started with a system-wide alert they thought was just a false positive, until every attempt to push the infrastructure update failed. Like, full stop failed. Jenkins stalled at 6%, pipeline logs froze, and by 8:03 a.m., the product owner was fielding her third client email with the subject line, Urgent, Deployment Rollback Request. Turns out when you gut a deployment pipeline built by one person and never learn how it ticks, it tends to bite back. Access tokens had expired overnight. They assumed they were auto-renewed because everything just worked before. But the auto-renewal wasn't baked in. It was manually triggered every Friday morning by a secure container I built during the Apache patch crisis last year. A patch I stayed late 3 nights in a row for. A patch Mark never even acknowledged. So now, without the rotation trigger, the auth chain collapsed. Then came the real fun. The patch notes? Gone. Not missing, just not where they thought they'd be, because someone, probably in a panic earlier that week, had wiped the shared release folder clean, trying to reset everything without understanding what half the files did. I'd labeled things clearly, but I guess when you think the documentation fairy will do all your thinking for you, even a file called Do Not Touch Deploy Skeleton feels optional. And then, as if the system itself wanted to make a point, their internal deployment platform ran its scheduled overnight script. It choked. Hard. Because the script still pointed to my container ID, the one I decommissioned the moment my resignation became effective. Support tickets started flooding in by 9:10, internal, external, cross-functional. Even the CTO pinged Mark directly, asking if the rollback environment was compromised. Mark, of course, tried to override the system manually, and that's when he met the brick wall I'd built with my own hands. The override command failed. The system spat back one beautiful, brutal line. Token owner Bar R. Marsden resigned. Escrow rotation required. It hung there on the screen like a ghost of all the times they took my work for granted. Escrow rotation had been my idea, one I fought to implement after a vendor almost deleted a live database with a misplaced push. I'd warned them that bypassing rotation wasn't just a risk, it was negligence. Mark had dismissed it, said it was overkill. Approved it anyway because the COO liked the way I explained it during the compliance walkthrough. Now he was locked out of his own system by a security protocol he never understood, built by a woman he forgot to credit. And I wasn't even there to see it. Did I gloat? No. I poured my coffee, sat on my balcony, watched the snow fall over the rooftops. Distant thunder. Somewhere in that office, people were panicking. Executives were dialing in from home. Engineers were trying to reverse engineer a system built out of sleepless nights and soft warnings. And all I could think was, that's the sound of consequences echoing through a hallway that used to ignore my voice. No rage, no revenge, just architecture doing what it was built to do, protect itself from carelessness. Even if that meant protecting it from them. Monday morning started with a 9:04 a.m. call from a number I didn't recognize, but I already knew who it was. HR. Her tone was soft, almost apologetic, like she'd drawn the short straw pulling my file. Hi, Emily. Mark would like to speak with you. He's asked if you'd consider returning, temporarily, just to help smooth the transition. I smiled into my coffee. I appreciate the outreach, I said, but I've already transitioned everything that was mine to transition. It's all documented. She cleared her throat. He's hoping for a bit of hands-on guidance, even just for a week. Of course he was, because now the infrastructure was bleeding and the band-aids weren't holding. Because they'd realized team effort doesn't mean much when no one on the team knows where the wiring runs. Because suddenly, the woman whose name they forgot to include in the summary was the only one who could explain how not to crash the ship. I said, I'm not available for that. I left cleanly, on time, and by the book. There was a pause. Then, would you consider a consulting rate? A few hours later, Mark himself called. His voice was a little too upbeat. Hey, Emily, glad we could connect. So, look, I think we got off on the wrong foot post-launch. I'd love to bring you back on for a few weeks. Just to help the team get situated, I can offer you a 20% bump. I didn't say anything. He filled the silence. Okay, 35% and a project lead title, fully remote. You'd be back in the system within the hour. I let the offer hang for a moment, then answered flatly. Mark, this was never about the money. Silence. I continued. You missed the moment, not the payout, the moment. He tried to pivot, talked about rebuilding trust, valuable contributions, long-term vision. That's when I cut in. You remember the release binder? I asked. Of course. It was in the shared drive I gave you access to 3 weeks ago. You removed my credentials the same day I submitted my notice, so the audit trail, the patch notes, the rollback configs, they're all in that drive. Another pause. A longer one. It wasn't anger I heard in his silence. It was the hollow realization that the collapse wasn't accidental. It was structural, built on choices. His. I see, he finally said. I didn't offer to resend anything, didn't offer to help. I didn't owe him anything. I had done everything right, gave notice, documented processes, filed clean logs, removed personal infrastructure, flagged risks, even offered mentorship before I left. And they still chose to make me invisible. Now they were choking on the consequences of their own amnesia and hoping I'd be sentimental enough to come save them from it. But I wasn't sentimental. I was free. And Mark? Mark was learning the hard way what happens when the woman who kept the machine running decides she's no longer interested in oiling parts that never gave her credit. Clean refusal. No second chances. And no consulting discount for ego repairs. I could have ghosted them completely, left them to rot in their own pile of dependencies and duct-taped wiki pages. But I didn't. Not because I owed them anything, but because James did. James was my shadow for a year and a half. Came in fresh from a failed fintech startup, green as spring lettuce and twice as eager. He asked the right questions. Stayed late to watch how I built test environments. Took notes like he knew every little trick might matter someday. I taught him more than any job description covered. How to build quietly, how to defend your code without sounding defensive, how to document for a future you might not be part of. And when the dust settled after my exit, he was the only name I gave them. I knew they'd call him. I also knew James wouldn't just say yes. Before he accepted the job, he texted me, sent over the draft contract they'd offered. Looks basic, I told him. Too much risk, too little control. He called me that night. They want me to be interim lead, 6-month contract. Mark says he's open to negotiating. So I coached him. Told him exactly what to ask for. Fixed term, no extension clause unless he initiates. Signature authority for infrastructure decisions, dual key access on all critical repos, audit-proof deployment logs, and a clause that grants him full public attribution in case of a published case study. Yes, even the small print. He rewrote the contract from scratch and slid it back across their polished HR table like a man who knew his worth. They signed it the next day. And just like that, James walked into the building not as a desperate junior, but as the only person who could untangle the mess Mark pretended didn't exist. On his first day, he pinged me. You good if I use your incident template? I replied, use everything. Just rename the file. He wrote back, what name should I use? I told him, yours. I only gave him one real piece of advice after that. Never wait for recognition. Build your leverage, then walk when it's quiet. Otherwise, they'll keep you in the shadows until they need someone to blame. He nodded. He got it. James wasn't going to make the same mistake I did, assuming loyalty would be repaid or that leadership would eventually notice the one person holding everything together from underneath. The irony? Mark now sits in on the stand-ups James leads, shows up with his mic muted, camera off, pretending to listen in while James does what I used to do, only this time with actual decision rights. James told me Mark hasn't interrupted a meeting once, not since the day James opened with, "We'll be using Marsden Protocol as the base until further notice." He didn't say it like it was a tribute. He said it like it was a standard. And honestly, that's all I ever wanted. Not praise, not a parade, just for the blueprint to survive, even if my name didn't. A few weeks after everything settled, I got a message on LinkedIn. Middle of a Tuesday, the kind of gray, quiet afternoon where you don't expect anything interesting to happen. It was from Lindsay, a former teammate who used to handle QA before they outsourced half her department and told her it was a realignment opportunity. The message just read, Mark's move to strategic initiatives. They say it's a soft landing. I stared at the screen for a second, then hit the little X. No reply. Not because I was bitter, but because there was nothing left to say. Strategic initiatives. Translation, he's been shelved. He'll keep his salary, maybe even his title, but nobody will listen to him again. They've tucked him away in some broom closet of corporate ambiguity until he either retires or resigns. It's the business equivalent of a nursing home for executives who flew too close to a fire they pretended wasn't real. And honestly, it tracks. Meanwhile, the project I bled for, the one that launched clean, under budget, with uptime metrics that made our CTO's teeth sweat, it's now proudly featured as a case study on the company website. Innovative infrastructure overhaul, a scalable transformation. Only one name is listed under project lead, James Renner. I didn't flinch. He earned it. He knew what it cost. Knew how many nights I spent rebuilding workflows from scratch because legacy garbage kept breaking every time someone sneezed near a Jenkins node. He was there when I stayed late to explain the auth tree to a compliance officer who thought SAML was a spreadsheet typo. He was there. He saw it. So if they're going to slap someone's name on the plaque now, I'm glad it's his. As for me, I work from a home office now. Mostly freelance architecture, some back-end rebuilds, a few consults here and there for early-stage startups that still know how to say thank you without needing a calendar reminder. No office politics. No frantic badge scans. No pretending I care about Mark's weekend at the lake with his second wife and her gluten-free rescue cat. Just real work, real trust, real time. I track my hours, I send my invoices, I get paid, I move on. Sometimes I still think about the moment I printed that resignation letter, the way it felt in my hand. Final, sharp, weightless. I didn't need applause, didn't need a corner office or a title with too many syllables. I just needed a clock. Because when the moment passed, so did I.